The underground station breathed like a living thing, vents exhaling warm air, rails humming, announcements drifting in and out with a tinny echo. Commuters stood in clustered islands, eyes down, minds elsewhere. Fluorescent lights washed everything in a pale sheen that made faces look a little colder than they really were. Where are you watching from today? Drop a quick comment and subscribe to Alight Tales for stories that flip first impressions on their head and reveal the quiet light people carry, even in the shadows. At the column nearest the yellow line, Harrison Cole checked his watch again. A high-polished stainless piece that flashed under the lights like a small moon. He didn't belong here and knew it, the starch in his shirt, the perfect lay of his tie, the sense that the city should part when he walked. His daughter, Emma, 16, kept one sneaker toe on the warning stripe and pretended not to notice him noticing. Public school day. Public ride. Dad's idea of humility with a side of optics. 20 yards away, Caleb Bryant shifted his canvas bag and raised his head. Ragged coat. Weeks-old beard. Eyes that scanned the track the way a medic scans a battlefield, silently counting risks. He'd learned the station's sounds in a language only he seemed to hear, the thin whine, the throatier hum, the faint electrical hiss that said something wasn't right. And it wasn't right now. Not the way the rail shimmered a pulse of blue then went dull. Not the sharp bite he could smell, ozone, copper, the edge of heat before it becomes pain. Emma leaned a little closer to see if the train lights were rounding the curve. Caleb felt his body move before his mind allowed permission. One step. Another. Hands up, palms open, voice low and even, the way he'd approached panic before. Miss, you'll want to step back. Please. Harrison turned as if someone had tugged an invisible wire attached to his spine. He took in the coat. The bag. The beard. He didn't look at the eyes. People rarely did. Don't touch my daughter, Harrison said, each word clipped clean. Heads pivoted across the platform. A ripple. Then the ripple became a current, phones out, cameras open, angles chosen. A story selected before the facts arrived. I'm not trying to touch her, Caleb said, hands still up. The rail's throwing bad current. She's too close. Harrison angled his body between Caleb and Emma, one arm like a gate. Back up. Now. Emma swallowed. The stranger didn't look dangerous. He looked, keyed in. Like he was listening to something no one else could hear. She slid half a step away from the edge on instinct, then paused when her father stiffened. Caleb glanced at the track. That faint blue. On. Off. Too regular to be random, too irregular to be safe. He clicked into professional mode, breathing measured, vision widening, speech slowing so fear wouldn't. Sir, I've seen this before, he said. You've got an arc potential near the junction sleeve. If she leans forward when the surge hits. You've seen this before. Harrison's laugh came out without humor. Did you diagnose it from your vast experience waiting under bridges? A man in a pea coat muttered, yikes. A woman in scrubs whispered, listen to him, though. A teen on live streamed to a couple hundred viewers, billionaire dad versus subway guy, NYC never disappoints. Caleb's jaw worked, a familiar ache. He let the insult pass, the way a boxer slips a jab. Look at the rail, he said. See the blue? That's not reflection. That's current dancing where it shouldn't. Harrison didn't look. He looked at Emma. Then he looked at the people looking at him. He straightened. We're fine, he announced to the air, as if reassurance could alter physics. There's staff for this. No staff stepped forward. The station attendant behind plexiglass pretended to be very interested in a stack of forms. Caleb took another slow step, still well outside arm's reach. 2 feet back, he said gently to Emma. Just 2. Please. Emma's eyes flicked down the tunnel. She could feel the train before she could see it, the low growl, the faint tremor in the soles of her shoes. She didn't mean to, but she eased her toe off the yellow ridge. Harrison exhaled hard. "Thank you," he said to Emma, but the words landed on Caleb like a rebuke anyway. He shifted, planting himself even more squarely between them. "I said step away." "I will," Caleb answered. "As soon as she's safe." A man in a reflective vest on the opposite platform cupped his hands and shouted something that disappeared into the cavern ceiling. The blue shimmer brightened, held, dimmed. People murmured, "Sound like water against stone." "Sir," Caleb said, lowering his hands a fraction, voice dipping to a register that cut through noise without sharpening, "you don't have to trust me. Just trust the symptom. Blue means heat where voltage is misbehaving. One slip. That's all it takes." "What gives you the right to speak to my child?" Harrison asked, but the edge had changed. Thinner. Fear under glass. Caleb thought of answering with his past. Thought of rank, ribbons, heat, blood, the way a heartbeat under his palms could be coaxed from chaos back to rhythm. Instead he said, being the closest grown-up with a working pair of eyes. Someone snorted. Someone clapped once, nervous and short, and then was embarrassed by it. The station speakers crackled, died, came back with a ghost of a voice, delays on the rail hummed louder. A scent like pennies and rain when lightning is around. "Emma," Harrison said, a thread in his voice now. "Back up." She started to move. A boy behind her shuffled to give space. And then a businessman with a gym bag squeezed past and shouldered her without looking. It was soft, careless, the kind of bump that happens every hour in a city this dense. Emma's sneaker slid on a smear of black dust. Her knee bent. Her weight tilted forward. Caleb's body tensed like a coiled spring. The blue along the rail thickened. It wasn't light. It was a promise. And the train was coming. Time pinched itself into smaller shapes. The clock on the wall still ticked 1 second at a time, but every heartbeat found a way to fit between them. Emma wobbled at the edge, arms flaring, trying to catch balance in the air. "Hey," someone barked. The word ricocheted off concrete. Caleb moved first. Not a lunge. A controlled step designed to close distance without spooking a frightened animal, or an overprotective father. "Easy," he said, not to Harrison, not to the crowd. To the girl whose heel kissed the drop to steel. Harrison's arm snapped wide to block. "Don't you?" "Dad," Emma gasped, the syllable thin with surprise as her phone slipped from her fingers. It spun, clattered, skidded, and came to rest with its face glowing a few inches from the precipice. Every camera on the platform swung to the little rectangle of light like it was a bomb. The rail hissed. Caleb stopped, hands floating in that no-man's land of not touching. "Emma," he said, using her name like a soft hand on a shoulder, "I've got you. Step back on 3. 1. Harrison stared at Caleb's hands and at the thrummings under the concrete and at his daughter's foot, half on safety, half on risk. For a beat he was 10 years younger and getting a call from the school, she fell on the field. Concussion protocol. She's okay. For a beat he was 5 years older and hearing a different voice say we did everything we could. Fear buckled his judgment. Security, he barked to no one and everyone. The station agent finally stood, a shape behind plexiglass. He picked up a phone. He set it down again. 2, Caleb said, and Emma lifted her heel, obeying the number before the command finished forming. A fat spark cracked off the join where the blue had been teasing out its presence. It jumped like an angry fish and smacked the rail housing with a sharp tack. A dozen people flinched. One woman cried out. The smell of hot metal dragged its edge across the platform. 3, Caleb said, and Emma moved, a half-step backward that felt like a mile. Harrison's hand found her bicep and gripped hard enough to leave a memory. He pulled her flush against him. Caleb exhaled once, the kind of breath that resets a system. For a heartbeat the world held. Then the blue came back thicker, drawn to a point like a bead at the tip of a wire. The rail thrummed. The air changed pressure. The arriving train's lights bled into the tunnel curve, white discs widening fast. A teen near the pillar whispered to her live, "Okay, this is actually crazy, the rail is," and then just filmed, because language had stepped out for a second. Harrison turned, finally, to look where Caleb had been telling him to look. He saw it, the wrong light in the wrong place. "What is that?" he asked, not to Caleb, not to Emma. "To the universe." "An arc looking for an excuse," Caleb said. "You don't want to be the excuse." A man in scrubs across the gap shouted, clearer this time, "Step back from the yellow. Power issue. Back." People listened. They moved. That's the thing about crowds, they take a while to start, then they go all at once. The yellow line became visible again as feet slid to safety. Emma breathed, "Thank you," and didn't know whether she meant the stranger or her father or the voice that had finally shouted from the other platform. Harrison glanced at Caleb, and for the very first time saw a detail that didn't fit the story he'd written at first glance, the posture. Not aggressive. Trained. The eyes, not shifty. Assessing. He realized he'd seen that look once before, in a surgical waiting room when a trauma team leader flicked from fear to focus. "What gives you the right?" Harrison repeated, but softer now, like he was asking himself for permission to change his mind. Caleb didn't take the opening. He nodded at Emma's phone by the edge. "Leave it." Emma laughed a small, incredulous laugh. "It's my whole life." "Then it can wait another life," Caleb said. "Yours." The train entered the station with a roar that swallowed the rest of the sentence. Wind shoved hair and coats. The blue brightened, there it was, a rope of light snapping under stress, and the first car's nose broke into the platform like a bullet. Everything that happened next got filmed from 12 different angles and 100 different biases. But they all captured the same thing. The blue arc leapt. Emma flinched. Harrison tightened. Caleb moved. He moved the way people move when training and memory take over and there isn't any room left for pride or stories or the stacked weight of 3 bad years. He crossed the last 2 steps with a precision that felt unreal, heel, toe, center of gravity low, and he reached, not for Emma's arm or Harrison's jacket, but for the space between them, the gap where panic lives. "Eyes on me," he told Emma, voice steady inside the wind and thunder. "Not the light." She did. The arc struck the housing with a furious sizzle and threw a bright shell of glare across their faces. The phone at the edge vibrated and slid a half-inch closer to the drop. Somewhere a woman sobbed. Somewhere a man said a prayer and didn't care who heard. Caleb's hands hovered, still not touching, still respecting a boundary Harrison hadn't lowered. But his presence filled the panic gap completely. He was the bridge and the break. The platform. The ground. For one suspended beat, the universe asked Harrison a question: do you want to be right, or do you want her safe? He blinked first. "Help her," he said, and it came out hoarse. Caleb nodded once. "We already are." The first car thundered past, braking hard. The rail coughed blue again. A shower of tiny sparks popped against the concrete lip and went out like fireflies. And in the mirror-slick window of the passing train, the crowd saw themselves, phones lifted, mouths open, and 3 figures at the edge, wealth, youth, and a man the city had chosen not to see, balanced on one collective breath. The train thundered out of the station, leaving behind a vacuum of silence broken only by the aftertaste of ozone. The crowd dispersed in uneven ripples, their curiosity satisfied, their footage secured. Some shook their heads, muttering about crazy mornings. Others replayed their clips already thinking in captions and hashtags. Harrison Cole kept his daughter pulled close, his grip so firm her sleeve wrinkled under his fingers. His eyes stayed fixed on the ragged man across from him, Caleb Bryant, like one studies a riddle with too many missing pieces. Caleb didn't demand thanks, didn't explain himself. He simply stood near the column, breathing slow, letting the adrenaline drain from his body. Emma, though, kept looking at him. Not the way you look at danger. The way you look at someone who just became more complicated than you'd been told to expect. The announcements resumed, hollow and routine. Next train arriving in 5 minutes. The world wanted to continue, as though nothing had happened. But inside Caleb's mind, the world was never routine. Every morning was the same choreography of survival: fold the tarp, brush his teeth at the public restroom, eat a piece of stale bread if he was lucky, and make his way toward the library as soon as the doors opened. There, among rows of books and the faint smell of old paper, he fed the only part of himself the streets hadn't managed to strip away, his mind. Caleb Bryant hadn't always been a ghost in worn clothes. Once, he'd been a man people trusted with lives. Sergeant Caleb Bryant, U.S. Army combat medic. A name spoken with gratitude by soldiers who woke from unconsciousness because his hands had kept their hearts beating. He remembered the weight of bandages soaked in sand and blood. The hum of helicopter blades as he crouched low over a patient, whispering steady words until the doors shut and lifted them toward safety. He'd been decorated more than once for bravery, though the medals now sat in a storage unit he could no longer afford. Civilian life was supposed to be easier. That's what they told him. But wars don't end just because geography changes. Sometimes the battlefield follows you home. Caleb had joined a medical research company after his discharge. His skills translated seamlessly into trauma response systems, cooling units that stabilized tissue, field kits that could buy minutes when minutes meant survival. For a while, he believed he'd found his second purpose. Until the day one false accusation ended it all. He could still hear the voice of his former supervisor, smooth and calculated, saying the words, misconduct. Breach of protocol. Unfit for sensitive work. None of it proven. None of it true. But enough to stain his file. Enough to turn interviews into interrogations, then dismissals. Enough to turn opportunity into exile. Overqualified, they said. Not a cultural fit. And then, when the gap in his history grew too wide, no response at all. He learned quickly what people really saw when they looked at him: not degrees, not service, not patents with his name in the fine print. They saw skin. They saw absence of an address. They saw someone better forgotten. And yet, Caleb kept his dignity. He volunteered at the shelter 3 nights a week, teaching science to kids who leaned forward like his words were treasure. He read discarded journals he fished from recycling bins outside corporate towers, scribbling notes in margins like his mind refused extinction. And in the mornings, like today, he walked the city with eyes tuned to notice the small details others missed. The tremor in the rail. The smoke curling too fast from a vent. The kind of thing soldiers, medics, and engineers all learn to read. Today, those instincts had brought him to Emma Cole's side before disaster struck. But Harrison Cole didn't know that history. He saw only the surface. And surfaces had always been enough for him. Harrison Cole lived in a world measured by portfolios and headlines. The only tremors he noticed were market shifts. He could recite quarterly earnings reports by memory, but the hum of a faulty rail? Invisible. Irrelevant. To him, Caleb wasn't a man who had once led medics in firefights. He was a disruption. A reminder of the city's rough edges, edges Harrison had spent millions to avoid. "Dad," Emma whispered, breaking his trance. Her voice trembled not with fear, but with something harder to name. "He saved me." Harrison's jaw tightened. "He interfered." "No," she said, firmer this time, surprising even herself. "He saw what you didn't." The words cut sharper than intended. Harrison prided himself on control, on being the one who always saw ahead, who predicted every move before it unfolded. Yet here, in a space of flickering lights and peeling tiles, a man he dismissed in less than a second had noticed what he had missed completely. Harrison looked around. The crowd was thinning, but a few cameras still lingered. He could already imagine the angles, the captions: billionaire clashes with homeless man on subway. Optics. Everything was optics. Caleb caught the look in his eyes. Recognition, not of respect, but of damage control. He knew Harrison would never see this as salvation, only risk. And risk, to men like Harrison, had to be erased or buried. But Caleb didn't care. Not anymore. His fight wasn't for headlines or gratitude. His fight was to remind himself he still had purpose. That even when the world called him invisible, his eyes still worked. His instincts still mattered. Emma looked at him again, softer this time. She didn't know his name yet, but she knew something about him her father didn't, the way he had spoken to her, not down at her, not past her. The way he had steadied her panic with calm instead of command. She wanted to ask his name. She wanted to thank him properly. But Harrison's grip on her arm was iron, and his expression left no room for rebellion. Caleb adjusted the strap of his bag and stepped back toward the shadows. He'd done his part. No applause needed. Harrison exhaled through his nose, still watching him. For a fleeting second, he wondered if the man's words had weight. Blue sparks. Arc potential. It all sounded like jargon, but the smell of ozone still clung to the air, and his daughter's stumble was too real to dismiss. He shook it off. Money solved problems. That was the rule. Always had been. Always would be. But deep down, a seed of unease lodged itself in his chest. Because the man he'd just dismissed had looked at the rail and seen truth. Harrison had looked and seen nothing. And that, more than anything, unsettled him. The city never cared about who it judged, but the subway that morning seemed determined to make the difference between perception and truth impossible to ignore. The faint hiss along the rail hadn't gone away. It pulsed. It grew. The smell of burned copper and scorched dust lingered in the air like a warning flare no one wanted to admit they smelled. Harrison Cole stood tall, refusing to let the morning unravel his sense of control. He kept Emma pressed to his side, every inch of his posture screaming protection, but his protection came with suspicion. His eyes never left the man across from him, the one who had dared to step toward his daughter. The stranger. Caleb Bryant. The ragged coat, the scuffed boots, the canvas bag with its frayed strap, those were what Harrison saw. What he refused to see was the stillness behind Caleb's gaze, the measured way his chest rose and fell, the eyes fixed not on Emma but on the dangerous shimmer below them. Harrison didn't want to admit that the man seemed to know something. And yet, Harrison's pride would not allow him to bend. Enough, he said sharply, his voice carrying across the thinning crowd. I don't know who you are or what you think you're doing, but I don't need the advice of someone who can't even manage his own life. The words cut the way only privilege can, swift, dismissive, final. Several commuters looked down at their shoes, unwilling to be caught staring at the cruelty of it. A mother tugged her child further down the platform. A teenager lowered his phone, suddenly uncomfortable. Caleb didn't flinch. He'd been called worse. He'd been dismissed by men in finer suits than Harrison's. What was one more voice in the chorus of disbelief? But he couldn't let it rest. Not this time. The rail isn't safe, he said evenly, his tone the same one he'd used in battlefields when panic spread faster than bullets. You can smell it. You can hear it. Your daughter nearly slipped. And if you're too proud to admit it, at least let her safety mean more than your reputation. The silence that followed wasn't silence at all. It was thick, filled with the hum of the rail, the shuffle of nervous feet, the faint click of a phone camera still recording. The platform had become a courtroom, and every eye waited for the billionaire's verdict. Harrison's jaw tightened. He leaned close to Emma as though Caleb weren't even there. "Stay behind me," he said. "People like that prey on moments like these." Emma didn't answer. She wasn't sure she believed her father. She wasn't sure she could ignore what she just felt, the steadiness in Caleb's voice, the way he'd counted her through her stumble, the way he had focused entirely on her and not once on money or recognition. A sharp crack snapped the tension. The rail spit a visible spark that jumped an inch and fizzed out against the concrete lip. Several people gasped. Emma flinched. Harrison's head jerked toward the sound. Caleb's voice dropped, soft but carrying. "That's not random. That's a system crying before it breaks." "Stop," Harrison barked, but his tone was weaker now, his eyes betraying the truth that he had seen and smelled the same thing. "Look at the smoke." Caleb pointed with a hand that trembled not with fear but with urgency. "That blue-gray haze, that's not dust. That's electrical coolant venting. I've studied this. I've seen this exact failure before. If the surge arcs when the train breaks, you could lose more than your phone on that edge." Harrison's face twisted, a storm of denial and doubt. "How would you know anything about this? This is proprietary city infrastructure. Only licensed engineers." Caleb stepped forward, voice sharpening. "Because I helped write the original safety protocols they built this rail system on. Because I spent 10 years fixing things no one else wanted to notice until it was too late. Because I've watched men die when warnings like this were ignored. That's how." The words hit like a drumbeat in the platform's hollow air. Harrison's lips parted, but no words came. For the first time, uncertainty showed on his face. The crowd whispered. Someone murmured, "He sounds like he knows." Another whispered, "He's making sense." The tide of perception was shifting, tiny grains at a time. And then the announcement cut through again, robotic and detached, "Train approaching. Please stand clear of the platform edge." The tunnel began to rumble. The lights far down the curve glowed faint and grew steadily brighter. The train was coming. Caleb's eyes flicked between the shimmer on the rail and Emma's shoes too close to the edge. His mind ran calculations faster than words: distance, timing, surge probability. He knew what was about to happen. And he knew Harrison still wasn't ready to trust him. The first gust of air from the tunnel hit, warm and heavy, carrying the scent of metal and oil. Jackets flapped. A newspaper skittered across the ground. The sound of steel on steel reverberated like a drumbeat announcing judgment. Emma edged back a half step, her instinct stronger than her father's command. Harrison kept his arm out protectively, but his eyes betrayed the nerves he could no longer mask. He glanced again at the shimmer, at the faint smoke curling where it shouldn't. Caleb spoke one last time, his voice no longer patient but edged with command. "Move her back now, or you'll regret it the rest of your life." Harrison snapped, his pride cracking under the weight of being told what to do. "You don't order me. You don't know me. You're nothing." The words hung in the air like shards of glass. Emma's breath caught. Caleb didn't blink. He had heard it all before. But the truth still needed to be said. "I know enough," Caleb answered calmly. "Enough to see you'd rather risk your daughter than admit a man without a suit might understand something you don't." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Harrison's face flushed crimson. For a moment, his hand twitched toward his phone, toward the call to security that would sweep Caleb away, erase him from this picture. But the rail chose that moment to scream. A surge of light burst across it, louder, sharper, undeniable. The arc stretched nearly 2 feet before snapping out. People yelped, stumbling back. Someone dropped their coffee. The smell of burned insulation filled the air. Emma's fear cracked through her father's pride. "Dad," she cried, clutching his sleeve. "He's right. Please." Harrison froze. His pride, his authority, his control, all of it collided against the raw truth that his daughter was afraid, and the ragged man had predicted every step of this unfolding disaster. For the first time in years, Harrison Cole had no answer. Caleb stepped closer, not too close, but enough that his words landed like steady hands. You have two choices. Step back and keep her safe. Or stay where you are and gamble her life on your ego. Decide now. The train's seconds away. The lights of the train exploded into brightness at the mouth of the tunnel. The roar grew deafening. Sparks flared again, blue and violent. And in that moment, Harrison's mask slipped. His eyes darted between his daughter's terrified face and the ragged stranger's steady one. For the briefest flicker of time, he saw not clothes, not class, not labels. He saw a man who understood danger when it whispered, a man who could read what others ignored. Harrison pulled Emma back. Not far. Not gracefully. But enough. Enough to let the arc flash again without touching her. Enough to let Caleb exhale in relief. The train screamed into the station, brakes squealing. The arc fizzled out with the sound of a dying match. The platform glowed in harsh white light as the first car roared past. The danger wasn't over, the rail still smoked, still hissed, but the immediate threat had passed. Caleb closed his eyes for half a second, letting his heartbeat slow. He'd kept her safe. That was enough. But Harrison? Harrison's face hardened again almost instantly, the relief twisting back into anger. The pride returned to cover the vulnerability. He turned to Caleb, voice sharp, meant for everyone still watching. Stay away from us. You're lucky I don't call the police right now. The words landed heavy, but they couldn't erase what had just happened. The crowd had seen. Emma had felt. Caleb had proved. And deep down, beneath all the layers of arrogance and denial, Harrison Cole knew the truth he'd spent days trying to bury. For one dangerous minute, his world had depended entirely on the man he had dismissed as nothing. The platform had become a furnace of tension. The train roared closer, its steel body screaming against the tracks. The tunnel lights strobed, flashing shadows across pale faces pressed to the wall. The crowd, once entertained by what they thought was a confrontation between a billionaire and a beggar, now knew better. Phones stayed raised, yes, but hands trembled. People whispered prayers under their breath. Every pair of eyes was glued to the same place, the edge of the platform where sparks hissed like angry serpents and a girl stood far too close. Emma Cole's chest heaved as she clung to her father's sleeve. The warning stripe beneath her sneakers glowed faintly in the flashes of electric blue rising from the rail. Each flare of light felt personal, like the city itself had chosen her for its next victim. Her father's arm was tight, protective, but his eyes betrayed him. Harrison Cole, the man who closed billion-dollar deals without blinking, looked terrified. He had dismissed the ragged stranger's warnings, scoffed at his words, insulted him in front of a crowd. But now, with the stench of ozone in his nose and his daughter's trembling body at his side, his certainty was unraveling. And Caleb Bryant could see it. Caleb stood with his weight balanced, every muscle alive. His coat hung loose, his boots scuffed, but his posture radiated a calm born of chaos. He had lived through worse storms than this, and every instinct he possessed told him the worst was seconds away. The rail spat again. A fat, blue arc leapt 3 feet and burst against the platform lip, cracking the yellow paint. A woman screamed. A child started crying. Even the security guard who had finally arrived backed up instinctively, his radio useless in the face of physics. Everybody against the wall. Caleb shouted, his voice sharp, commanding. Now. Move. The tone startled even Harrison. This was no plea, no request. It was an order, the kind soldiers obey without hesitation. And the crowd obeyed. They shuffled backward in a wave, pressing themselves to the tiles, eyes wide, mouths silent. Everyone, except Harrison. He held Emma like a shield, his pride still trying to stand between her and the ragged man. "Don't come closer," he barked. Caleb ignored the words. He kept his eyes locked on Emma, his voice firm but not unkind. "Stay calm. Step back with me. Nice and easy." Emma nodded without meaning to. His tone wasn't like her father's, commanding, yes, but not harsh. It was steady, focused, like he was pulling her out of the storm by voice alone. She tried to move. Her sneaker heel caught on a discarded water bottle. She stumbled forward, toward the edge. "Emma!" Harrison lunged, grabbing her arm, but his motion was clumsy, panicked. Caleb moved like lightning. His body coiled and sprang, cutting the distance in 2 strides. His hands shot out, not to yank, not to seize, but to guide, redirecting her momentum away from danger. His palm brushed her elbow just enough to steady her as her foot teetered inches above the crackling rail. And then the rail exploded. A blue flare erupted, violent and hungry, striking exactly where Emma had been a heartbeat earlier. The sound was like a gunshot, a whip crack of electricity that rattled every bone on the platform. The air filled with the acrid bite of burning metal. People screamed, ducking, covering their heads. Caleb's body curved around Emma, shielding her with his frame. He smelled the ozone, felt the heat kiss his cheek, but he didn't flinch. His eyes never left the danger, scanning the smoke pattern, reading the failure as if it were a page only he could decipher. Emma gasped, then clung to her father's arm, but her wide eyes stayed fixed on Caleb. Harrison's heart thudded so violently he thought it might break his ribs. For one unbearable second, the truth landed like a hammer. The man he had insulted, dismissed, tried to push away, had just saved his daughter's life. And everyone had seen it. The crowd broke its silence with a flood of whispers. He pulled her back. He knew exactly when it would blow. That man just saved her. Phones pivoted, no longer mocking, but documenting a miracle. The story was no longer billionaire versus beggar, it was about the man nobody wanted to see becoming the only person who mattered. Emma's breathing steadied. She let go of her father's sleeve and turned fully toward Caleb. Her voice shook, but her words were clear. "You saved me." Caleb nodded once, his face calm, his voice quiet. "You saved yourself by listening." Tears pricked her eyes. For a moment, she forgot the crowd, the cameras, even her father's iron grip. All she saw was the man who had stood between her and death. Harrison swallowed hard. His pride screamed at him to reassert control, to take back the narrative. His lips parted to frame Caleb as reckless, as lucky, as irrelevant. But the words wouldn't come. He could feel the crowd's eyes on him. He could hear the clapping starting at the far end of the platform, hesitant at first, then growing louder, swelling into applause that filled the station. Not for him. For Caleb. The ragged stranger. The man Harrison had called nothing. The applause rolled like thunder. People cheered, shouted thanks, raised their phones high to capture the moment. And in the middle of it all stood Caleb, coat worn, boots scuffed, face lined with years of hardship, but eyes steady, posture unshaken. Emma stepped closer, her hand brushing his sleeve. "What's your name?" she asked softly. Caleb hesitated. He wasn't used to being asked, not anymore. But at last, he answered, "Caleb Bryant." A murmur rippled through part of the crowd. The name rang familiar to some, a whisper from old news articles, a forgotten headline. A man once praised as a rising star in medical engineering, then vanished. The security guard, still frozen near the stairs, finally spoke, his voice uncertain. "Mr. Cole, do you want me to remove him?" The applause faltered, replaced by sharp glares from the crowd. A woman near the front snapped, "Remove him. He just saved her." A man shouted, "You should be thanking him, not throwing him out." All eyes swung to Harrison. Cameras zoomed. His decision would define the story. For once, the billionaire banker had no words. His throat constricted, his face flushed, his pride battled his fear. He wanted to deny, to control, to erase, but he couldn't. The truth was too loud. The proof too visible. He forced a smile, brittle, shaky. "No," he said hoarsely. He helped." The words tasted like ash. Caleb's eyes met his, calm and unwavering. There was no triumph there, no gloating. Just truth. "She's safe," Caleb said simply. "That's what matters." Emma's tears slipped free. She looked at her father, then back at Caleb. And though she said nothing, the message was clear: I trust him more than you right now. The applause swelled again, echoing against the tiled walls, louder this time, uncontainable. The cameras captured it all, the billionaire forced to acknowledge the worth of the man he had tried to erase, the daughter clinging not to wealth but to the dignity of a stranger. And as the smoke from the rail thinned into the stale subway air, one truth was undeniable. The morning that had begun with arrogance and dismissal had ended with salvation. And the man everyone ignored stood at the center of it, undeniable, unshaken, unforgotten. The platform didn't go quiet so much as it settled. Applause dwindled into murmurs. The last wisps of ozone lost their bite, swallowed by the ordinary subway smell of dust and brakes. A few people came forward to ask if Emma was okay, more drifted away, already editing captions in their heads. The security guard, out of his depth, radioed in a minor electrical incident that had felt like a near miss with fate. Caleb adjusted the strap of his canvas bag. He didn't look at the cameras. He didn't bow. He didn't reach for a thanks, because he hadn't come for one. He looked once at Emma, alive, shaken, steady, and gave her the smallest nod a person gives another when the only thing left to say is "you're safe." Then he turned for the stairs. "Wait," Emma said, a hand lifting from her side like a reflex. It wasn't a command, not even a plea. Just a thread she hoped would hold one more moment. Caleb paused. Harrison didn't. Years of controlling the narrative kicked in. He stepped up beside his daughter with a lawyer's smile and a CEO's voice. "I'll have my office reach out," he said, words trying to sound generous, hands trying to sound clean. "There's, clearly some gratitude owed." Caleb met his eyes, and for the first time, Harrison felt what it was like to have his gaze weighed, and to be found light. "Take care of your daughter," Caleb said. "That's the debt." He dipped his head to Emma. "Stay off the yellow." Then he climbed. He didn't climb like a man chased. He climbed like a man leaving a field he'd just stabilized. 2 steps, 3, a silhouette swallowed by the day. News travels fast in a city that's always hungry. By lunch, 3 angles of shaky phone footage had stitched themselves into one coherent truth: a billionaire's pride, a girl on the edge, and a man in a threadbare coat who understood danger before anyone else. By dinner, Emma's name trended only in guesses, and Harrison's trended exactly for what he'd said, and when. The comments weren't kind. They weren't subtle. In a penthouse of glass and art, Harrison watched the footage alone. There he was, chin high, eyes hard, sentence sharpened like a blade: "You're nothing." There Caleb was, stillness, then motion, then mercy. There Emma was, the flinch, the save, the look. Harrison had built a life on indicators, on data streams he could turn into advantage. This stream didn't bend. The numbers wrote one story: he had failed in the moment that counted. He poured a drink. It tasted like metal. He set it down untouched. He thought of statements he could issue, phrases that did enough without admitting too much. He drafted one. He deleted it. The truth wasn't a PR problem, not this time. The truth was that a man he had refused to see had shouldered the responsibility Harrison claimed as identity, protector, decider, father. He picked up his phone and did something he had not done in a very long time. He searched without using an assistant. Caleb Bryant. At first, scraps. A city volunteer roster with initials. A shelter newsletter blurb, engineering classes Tuesdays and Thursdays, Mr. C, is a hit. Then, deeper, an old conference program with a name in small caps, Sergeant Caleb L. Bryant, Field Hypothermia Stabilization Protocols, Keynote Panel. Pinned beside it in some forgotten blog, a JPEG of a medal ceremony. Caleb's face was clean-shaven there, his posture the same still kind of tall. Farther down, the fracture. A short, brutal article from years ago. Alleged procedural breach. Investigation pending. No follow-up linked. Just a footnote, consultancy terminated. Harrison knew how that story went. Investigations that took too long. Vindications that arrived without a press release. Quiet exiles. A call would be easy. A donation, easier. But money was anesthesia, and he was interested in pain, for once, the useful kind. He put on a coat and told his driver he'd walk. The shelter director was a woman with practical hair and the kind of stare that made donors behave. She met Harrison in a narrow office lined with hand-lettered signs about schedules and hope. "We're closed to tours," she said, without looking impressed by the name he introduced. "I'm not here for a tour." He swallowed pride like a pill. "I'm looking for one of your volunteers." Caleb Bryant. She studied him the way triage studies a wound, what's cosmetic, what's critical. "Why?" "My daughter is alive because he was in the right place," Harrison said. The words were heavy and clean. "Because he knew what to do when I didn't." Something softened at the edge of her mouth, but her shoulders stayed square. "He teaches on Tuesdays and Thursdays," she said at last. "Makes circuits out of scrap and shows kids the math behind the magic. If you're here to fix him, don't. He's not broken. If you're here to help us keep him, take a seat." Harrison sat. He listened. To numbers that didn't live on screens, how many beds, how many meals, how many job placements that stuck. To names said carefully. To the way people who had lost so much still laughed like it counted. He learned that Caleb slept outside by choice more nights than not, the dorms were noisy, and quiet kept his mind clear. He learned that Caleb brought journals back from library sales and gave them away to kids with fatherless questions. He learned that the accusations that took his life apart had withered in a file labeled closed, but the stain had set, employers sniffed around the edges and moved on. "Does he want charity?" Harrison asked, and hated himself for not knowing how to say it better. The director shook her head. "He wants dignity. Those aren't the same currency." He left a check. It was large, but it wasn't the point. He asked for nothing to be named after anyone. He wrote his phone number on the corner of a post-it and slid it across the desk. "When he comes in," he said, "tell him I need to return something I took." "What's that?" "First impressions." "Those aren't refundable," she said, but she kept the number. It was raining when they finally met again. Not a storm, just a steady city rain that made neon smear and tires hiss. Caleb arrived at the shelter with a bundle of wire and a coffee he hadn't bought for himself. He listened to a kid explain a circuit with too much confidence and just enough accuracy. He corrected the part that mattered. He praised the part that took courage. "Someone came by for you," the director said when the class broke. He left a number written like it hurt. Caleb read it once, then again. He didn't make people chase. He had learned the cost and pride of being pursued, and the greater cost of being cornered. He washed his hands at the sink and called. Harrison answered on the first ring. "Thank you," he said, before anything else. A beat passed. "For my daughter. For embarrassing me at exactly the right time." Caleb leaned against the wall beneath a corkboard of job leads. "I wasn't aiming for your pride." "I know. A breath. Let me buy you dinner. That's a rich sentence, Caleb said, and almost smiled. What for? To listen, Harrison said. And to learn. Caleb considered turning him down on principle. Then he looked at the Tuesday list, the one on the corkboard, the one that scrolled needs like equations, 20 winter coats, 9 pairs of work boots, bus passes, textbooks, a laptop for a kid who could code his way out if someone would put a keyboard in his hands. One condition, Caleb said. We eat near the shelter. And we bring back leftovers. Harrison said, done, and meant it. They sat by a window that fogged when people pushed the door. A waitress in a borrowed jacket poured coffee like she understood how much of the world ran on it. Caleb ordered something cheap out of habit. Harrison ordered too much and didn't try to hide it. He didn't lead with apology, he had learned enough in a day to know that sorry lands better when you've done the arithmetic on why. I judged you, he said, eyes open, hands still. I chose a story that made me feel safe. I used my voice to make it true. I was wrong. Caleb stirred sugar into his coffee he wouldn't sweeten. People get the story wrong all the time, he said. They just don't usually get to be wrong with a microphone. They talked. Not like a donor and a case. Like men who had both built and lost things no one else could see. Harrison asked about the rail. Caleb explained arcs in words that turned physics into clear water. He drew a little diagram on a napkin and wrote pattern recognition at the top, and for once Harrison saw a graph that mattered more than his own. Harrison asked about service. Caleb gave him the version civilians can carry without breaking, the heat, the dust, the voice you use when someone needs your steadiness more than they need your comfort. Harrison asked about the investigation he'd found online. Caleb's jaw set for the first time, then released. Closed without comment, he said. Which is a comment of its own. The truth didn't travel as far as the headline. Let's carry it, Harrison said, too quickly, then slowed. Not for optics. For record. Caleb watched him. Pride is a suit, he thought, even off the hanger, it keeps its shape. If we do it, he said, we do it in daylight. Independent. No PR firm. No ribbon cutting. Agreed. And it doesn't start with me. It starts with them. He tipped his head toward the shelter, toward the rain-washed street, toward the cluster of kids who had gathered at the window to pretend they weren't watching. Scholarships. A tool library. Transit internships that pay first and judge last. You want to fix a rail? Hire the kid who knows where the city breaks and why. Harrison didn't blink. Blueprint it, he said. You write it. I'll fund it, and I'll get out of the way. Caleb blinked instead. It wasn't the money that surprised him, it was the second half of the sentence. Getting out of the way is a skill rich men don't practice. And you, Harrison added, not to claim a trophy but to close a circuit, come run the safety program for the city lines I've invested in. No charity. Salary. Team. Authority. If you say a line sleeps, it sleeps. If you say a fix can't wait, it doesn't. I can get the doors open. I can't walk through them for you. Caleb's hand tightened around the coffee mug. The heat seeped into his palm, into his bones. He thought of the library mornings and the shelter nights, of a mind kept sharp out of stubborn love for a world that had dulled everything else. He thought of Emma's eyes at the platform's edge. He thought of the word that mattered, dignity. 2 conditions, he said. Harrison nodded, braced. First, the investigation. Independent counsel. If it clears me with the same decibels that named me guilty. If it doesn't, we live with the truth. And the second? We don't make me the point, Caleb said. Not in the brochures. Not in your keynote. We make the work the point. We make the kids the headline. You want a story? Tell that one. The waitress brought boxes. Harrison slid his card without asking for a discount on the world. Done, he said again, and this time the word felt like bricks set on mortar. They walked back with too much food and not enough umbrellas. The shelter door opened before they knocked. Kids cheered because leftovers feel like a feast when the night has been long. The director met Harrison's eyes and nodded once, as if to say this is the right speed. On a corkboard, a new list appeared in neat block letters later that week. Alight works. Tool library, soldering irons, multimeters, safety gear. Paid transit internships, no address required to apply. Weekly repair lab, how the city breathes and how to keep it that way. Legal fund for clearing records/names. Scholarship, the platform line, for kids who see danger before it sparks. No photo shoot accompanied the list. No ribbon. Just kids with pens arguing about which order to tackle it all. Emma watched the videos again in her room, not to relive fear but to study the face she trusted in the noise. She sent one link to a group chat with a text, "He saved me." She typed, deleted, typed again, and then recorded something that wasn't a performance. "My name is Emma," she said to her camera, eyes steady. "You saw pieces of what happened on the platform. Here's what you didn't see." He said my name like a seatbelt. He counted me out of panic. He didn't touch me until the physics said touch or lose. My dad is learning. So am I. She didn't upload it that night. She sent it to one person instead. "Show your father," the reply said. "He needs your fairness more than he needs our defense." She did. He cried without making a noise. He wrote a statement that wasn't a statement at all. It read like a page from a journal he hadn't kept. "I was wrong. Not as a figurehead. As a man. I am trying to deserve the second chance my daughter got before me." It didn't trend. It wasn't designed to. But people found it anyway, the ones who wanted to believe wealth can learn and that humility doesn't always have a camera in the room. Months later, a train paused at a platform lit a little brighter than before. A small placard on a pillar, brushed metal without flourish, read: "If something looks wrong, say it. If someone sees it first, listen." Below, in letters no larger than a bus transfer, Program Director, C. Bryant. A boy in a hoodie ran a finger over the name like it might smudge. "He comes on Tuesdays," he told his friend. "Teaches us how the rails talk." "What do they say?" "They say, don't wait to be important before you act." At the other end of the platform, Harrison stood with Emma and didn't stand in front of her. He pointed out a maintenance team swapping a sleeve with the haste of people who know failure by scent. He nodded once to a man in a canvas jacket whose ID badge hung on a lanyard that finally felt like it belonged on his chest. Caleb nodded back. He didn't stay. He walked the line because the line was his job, and the job was the promise. The city kept breathing. Sometimes justice arrives with a gavel. More often, it shows up in work boots and a list on a corkboard. Sometimes redemption is a headline. Most often, it's a Tuesday class where a kid learns that blue in the wrong place means wait, step back, call it out. Sometimes the man the world ignores pulls a stranger out of danger. And sometimes the stranger becomes a neighbor, and the neighbor becomes a teacher, and the teacher becomes a standard. Harrison learned to see. Emma learned to say what she saw. Caleb kept doing what he did the day the rail lit up: notice, warn, act, without needing to be invited to matter. The story didn't end on the platform. It ends wherever someone listens sooner than they would have, speaks up faster than they used to, and gives dignity the right of way. And if you need a name for that, call it what the kids wrote in marker at the top of the corkboard: Alight works. Where are you watching from today? Drop a comment and subscribe to Alight Tales for true-to-life stories of quiet courage, second chances, and extraordinary justice that change how we see each other, and the city we share.